At the heart of any conversation about why art is bad lies the reason why it's actually bad. Is it due to technical failures, an inability to capture the desired goals of the piece, ineptitude, or is it because it advocates for bad things? To illustrate my point, we could talk about well documented pieces of fascist propaganda, Triumph of the Will, Birth of the Nation, etc., but the more useful and less easy to use against me for false flagging purposes would be my least favorite piece of theater ever.
You think I can't stand the sight of blood? I'd love to see the whole of your sex swimming in a lake of blood. You think I love you because my womb desired your seed?
Miss Julie is a play written by August Strindberg in 1888, and it is, to the sick world of theater history, a famous bit of the Western canon, the canon being a collection of old plays written by white guys going back to ancient Greece, or at least still was back when I went to school. Miss Julie is historical for some reasons, but I don't want to talk about naturalism or modernism or Emily Zola or the well-made play. Miss Julie is notable in this context because of this preface penned by Strindberg himself. Miss Julie is a modern character. Not that the half-woman, the man-hater, has not existed always, but because now that she has been discovered, she has stepped to the front and began to make a noise. The half-woman is a type who thrusts herself forward, selling herself nowadays for power, decorations, distinctions, diplomas, as formerly for money. The type implies degeneration. It is not a good type, and it does not endure, but it can unfortunately transmit its misery, and degenerate men seem instinctively to choose their mates from among such women, and so they breed. Fun fact, this is the more mild quote of his I was able to find. There's a much worse section, but it's almost literally impossible to find because most people talk about his preface to Miss Julie because he goes on to make several page-long tirades about how the set should look and what the music should be like and so on. However, my mother found the full quote for me, so if you're watching right now, hi Mom, thank you for doing that to yourself, and I am so sorry. Here's the full quote. I say Miss Julie is a modern character, not because blah 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 man-hating, taking the stage, making notes, victim of a superstition, one that has seized even stronger minds, that women, that stunted form of human being, stands herself in an absurd struggle with him in which she falls. Absurd because a stunted form subject to the laws of propagation will always be born stunted. A, the man, and B, the woman, start from the same point C, A with a speed of, let us say, 100, and B with a speed of 60. When will B overtake A? Answer, never. Neither. He goes on like this, you get it. So, Miss Julie is a play about the titular Miss Julie falling in love with a poor man named Jean, who treats her like utter shit for the entire play until she breaks down, screams bloody murder at him, and then begs him to order her to kill herself because she can't do it herself. This play has, in no small part, built on the premise that Strindberg intended to establish that weak, half-formed, degenerate souls have no place in the world, declaring that the half-woman, a woman who foolishly believes herself to be able to work and negotiate a man's world instead of making babies and being a good housewife, should be shunned and expunged from society until they behave or die. Honestly, the incel community wishes they were on Strindberg's level. What turns this whole thing on its head is, well, many things, actually. On one hand, Miss Julie survives in the canon as a piece of naturalist theater history because it was controversial for its time, not for any of the misogyny, but because it kind of depicted like a sex scene off stage that happened while other action was happening on stage. Scandal. And also, more notably for me personally, as someone who was in an acting studio during my undergrad for this particularly vivid monologue, I was going to perform it, but it's just my voice out here, and I don't want to. It's on the screen now if you want to read it. It's fine, I guess. This is a little bit of my own reading, but in the industry, you saw this monologue popping up all over the place. I don't know if you still do now. I'm too ugly, in fact, to be an actress these days, but this is what has happened, more or less, with this play. It has a history of being beloved by women, by people who empathize with Julie. The thing that Strindberg said we would only do if we were weak and degenerate or whatever, but who cares? I'm alive and he's not, so fuck you. We can make these arguments that women, especially women in theater, who don't often get to say that kind of raw shit on stage. Love this because this character gets to be angry and mean and yell, and it feels good to do that. All of these thoughts, the arguments about this play being part of the birth of naturalism, that Schoenberg was a hard-to-understand polemicist, that his efforts to make a misogyny play fail, how much of that do we weigh against what we explicitly know to be this author's views at the time? So the desire to get right to the heart of the moral quandary, tempting though it may be, must be suppressed because there is a Gordian knot of nightmare discourse wound around every facet of talking about this game. How can anyone trust anything about the game when it's up in the air whether or not the game is even good or not? So allow me to tell you, as I have watched an entire long play of the game, I've seen all the details of the main story and most of the important school chum side quests, so let's talk about the game itself and whether or not it's good. It's not. Okay, so I'll get a little further into it. This is a treat to myself. I'm doing one of my usual videos inside this hell video, so let's talk about Hogwarts Legacy and its incredibly weird failures. So Legacy introduces us as a player character here, not Harry Potter. They're going to Hogwarts as a 5th year, a strange thing that makes you most peculiar. On your way there, you get attacked by a dragon after being given a key, which you and your professor, Professor Fig, touch, which teleports you off to Gringotts, the bank that the goblins run, the goblins being a hook-nosed, greedy underclass of not peoples, and who will be one of, I want to say, 4 types of enemies in the game. You and Fig find a pensive, a memory-holding thing to learn about this girl named Isadora. She also joined Hogwarts 100 years ago, I think, also as a 5th year. And she also seemed to have a special connection to ancient magic. Blue-flavored magic, mostly by what it looks like in the game. You and Fig get to Hogwarts, you take a personality test to see how brave, nice, smart, or evil, I mean cunning you are, and that's basically going to be the setup of the game. You travel between being a 15-year-old in magic school, exploring Hogsmeade to buy things, exploring the surrounding areas, to go dungeon exploring, do quests for your friends, find more pensives, get hunted by the goblins, the poacher is a comically evil villain who's working with the evil goblins, all while your school chums get further and further into their little plot lines. If this structure sounds familiar to you, might I introduce you to most modern AAA games? You have a skill tree, a fiddly little inventory system, companions who go through things. The biggest impression I had while watching footage of this is that I've played this game before and it's called Dragon Age 2. Like Hogwarts Legacy, Dragon Age 2 has you in one locale for the entire game, going to and fro the various places in it, scrounging for gear that's marginally better than the stuff you have on, and you have allies who go through their own little story plots, and those get more intense as the story goes, etc., etc. This is also very similar to Dragon Age Inquisition, in that Inquisition is also open world, and you have a unique superpower that you weren't aware of prior to the start of the game, and that unique power puts you on a path for a greater, more important conflict, but... well, okay. Where these differ is a matter of world and substance, and this isn't to laud the world of Dragon Age as some kind of enlightened new ground in storytelling. I kind of don't really like the premise of Dragon Age that much. It's very much a story built on the concept of edgy, grimly dark fantasy worlds. Sure, there are elves and magic and demons, but it's all gross and bloody, and there's sex violence in some moments, and it's just kind of reads as overly dour and cynical. However, it is a world full of interlocking tensions and conflicts that go way, way past any of the 3-player characters, and that makes the world feel a little more realized and full. In comparison, Harry Potter has always struggled since the world was constructed with an almost single-minded intent to preserve Harry's hero's journey. Jesus Christ, that line sucks. Everything in Harry's life is constructed to make sure that he can go through the particular arc of whichever novel we're in. Harry has to live with his abusive foster parents because of fiddly bureaucratic magic rules, to ensure that he's properly miserable, to preserve how good it feels at the start of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th novels, to leave and go back to the whimsical magic world. The professors and role models in his life are all almost conspicuously cryptic and puzzle-like in what information they do and don't disclose to him, in order to ensure that he has to solve the riddle at the end of the year. This kind of world building is fine. It's an okay enough thing to construct for your YA novel, but the attempt to expand on it and create an entire world on this foundation starts to show some serious cracks and issues. So, in Hogwarts Legacy, they just make you another Harry Potter. Sure, you're not literally Harry Potter, but you have a connection to a powerful secret hidden in Hogwarts that makes you the prime target of the main villains, so you have to go to school, sneak around with your friends, break school rules to pursue the truth and save the day, and the game will bend over backward to ensure that this is maintained to give you maximum agency. You're joining in your 5th year, making you very strange, but you're also hyper competent in all of your classes. At flying, at dueling, oftentimes the game has you fighting dozens of wizards and witches, single-handedly. It all feels like the game can't let you have a real sense of constructing your own adventure. Sure, you pick your own house, but you have to go through the story, and I looked it up to be sure, but the story only adapts to one choice you make at the very end of the game, and that choice doesn't really change that much, presumably to be filled in by a later installment, or a DLC, or whatever. It's Dragon Age 2, but where the Dragon Age series is built on the idea of your choices having expanding consequences for the world around you and the people you care about, Hogwarts Legacy can let you choose to learn all the unforgivable curses, but the game can't have the capacity for that to mean anything about you. No one cares. And I didn't even bring up the bigotry stuff. And I did that for a reason, not to give legitimacy to the idea that a piece of art's more problematic or pernicious elements shouldn't be discussed when talking about a video game. I did this to prove that even without going into the bigger issues, the game is a mess. It's unimaginative, a replica of a kind of game that's already been replicated over and over in AAA prestige titles, but burdened with having to take place in the world of Harry Potter, which is already not a good world to put this kind of game in, because the books are already ill-suited to the major Hollywood action film, as most of the fights in the books happen really quickly. Spells would fire off, and they would have an almost absolute power, because the books were, for the longest time, more about solving a puzzle than having an action sequence that would be interesting to film, or in this case, to play. That's why the B-roll you've been seeing, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets for the Nintendo GameCube, has the same video game spells and potions and abstractions as Hogwarts Legacy. The Wiggenweld potion doesn't exist in the books or the movies because it's a healing potion. Flipendo doesn't exist because it's a video game do damage spell, or in the case of Legacy, it's one of like 3 stun an enemy in the air spells. Blood libel. So Hogwarts Legacy is played into some serious anti-Semitic tropes. Whoops! The goblins are hunting you, the 15-year-old main character, along with other students, to use your magic in their rituals, and that, on some level, is pretty blood libel-esque. It's giving us blood libel. There's a horn that looks like a shofar. That's a goblin relic that they filled with gorgonzola cheese, a typically not kosher cheese, that's dated back to 1612, which, if you didn't know, was the year of the Fett Milch Uprising, the one with the pogrom, which, fun fact, did you know that a pogrom is an organized riot with the aim of expelling or massacring an ethnic group? Wow! Hogwarts Legacy, a story about the hook-nosed banker species who have been oppressed by the wizards, who seek a revolution, who are hunting a child for ritual reasons, might be in a bit of trouble. Uh-oh, I haven't even gotten to the other stuff. However, I'm sure there are those of you who may have opened this video, which, big mistake, and heard these things and went, hold on, wait, this is a bit of a stretch, and you know what? You may even have gone so far as to point out that they never explicitly say that they need the main character's blood specifically, which is a pretty important part in a blood libel, that they're using the blood, right? And hold on, you say this is a shofar, but a shofar has a pretty significant curve in its reference image, and this one is pretty, straightened out. And it's also an animal bone horn, which is not something that's uniquely Jewish, and while we're at it, the Fett Milch Uprising, sure, there were tensions in 1612, but the uprising and the pogrom didn't actually happen until 1614. And hey, now some forms of gorgonzola cheese can be prepared in a way that makes it kosher. That one's actually hard to figure out. It's weirdly hard to look up kosher gorgonzola. You can buy kosher gorgonzola cheese, but nothing details the process clearly. That doesn't sound at least a little confusing. A site says that it's kosher if a Jew oversees the addition of rennet into the process, but look, at the end of the day, we've taken a wrong turn in this argument by wanting to make a mounting pile of ominous, albeit not strictly conclusive, evidence into perfect proof of the game's evil in a way that secures the position to boycott and protest it as the morally good choice. Now, I believe that identifying the game as anti-Semitic is a good position. I personally do find it pretty damn anti-Semitic, morally incurious, built on a shallow, poorly developed world conceived by an ignorant, biased person, but I feel like we need to hone in on this impulse because it is what is complicating how we talk about art built by unethical people. So, to start things off, let's wrap Joanne back into this. I'm deciding at this point to respect her perspectives on biological reality, so as much as he wants me to call her Robert or J.K. Rowling, she's assigned Joanne at birth. Look, this is my one really bitchy joke. Please just let me have it. So, Joanne has been identified as a transphobe by a lot of people by now, something that she and her supporters deny pretty adamantly. This is because of how dog whistles and plausible deniability work. Joanne has never claimed any explicit statement wherein she calls herself a transphobe. She doesn't identify as one. She just supports sex-based rights and protection for women in women-only spaces. She just also does this while making friends with people who have ties to the Heritage Foundation, gender-critical groups associated with groups that are anti-abortion. I think she actually came down pretty neatly on the side of anti-abortion in the 2020 novel Troubled Blood under her he/him sona, finding herself tweeting supportive comments to professional woman knower Matt Walsh, but because, she's never explicitly said she's a bigot, the debate for a lot of people gets to remain in the air. Oftentimes, her supporters will gesture to her tepid comments supporting some trans people, and will likely, in Hogwarts Legacy, point to Serona Ryan, the first canon trans woman in the HP universe. Wow. Granted, her name has Sir in it, and Ryan's a pretty masculine-sounding name, though Serona is a Celtic goddess of health, albeit a lot of her imagery is built around snakes and eggs, but we're getting dragged back into hell here. The point of all of this is that people will look at these things to try and find a perfect ruling. We, on some level, want to take the conclusion that Joanne is a bigot and retrofit everything that she's ever done into this. Everything. The goblin bankers, the racist naming conventions, Rita Skeeter's perverse stalking juxtaposed with her mannish hands and square jaw, her relative inability to conceive of a conclusion to a story with a fascist dictator who exploits and consumes the system to gain power that ends in any other way than the system returning to the way it was, the status quo preserved, our heroes becoming parts of the system. All of this as proof that her bigotry is inherent, that she's bad and always has been bad. And this is the heart of the problem. This is why the debate circles about again and again. By trying to create this image, we are trying to insulate ourselves from the reality of bigotry. Trying to divine Joanne's soul as fundamentally evil, inherently bigoted, denies the idea that bigotry travels mostly through inertia. Joanne being always evil denies the reality that cruelty, oppression, etc. thrives out of inaction and a lack of consideration. It's more likely that the anti-Semitic tropes present in her depiction of goblins are holdovers from a history of goblins carrying these tropes, and she never cared to think further about it. Attributing malevolent intent into her inane word association naming conventions undermines the real villain, that she grew up in an age where caring about other people's cultures was just not considered. Let's look back at the world of Hogwarts Legacy. Keita Jackson's review of Hogwarts Legacy makes a point that the game takes place in the late 1800s and showcases a Hogwarts that is vividly diverse, down to the token trans bartender in Hogsmeade. She asks what happens in the following century that results in Harry's Hogwarts staffed entirely with white British folks, that the visiting students from such wild, exotic locales as France and Bulgaria were treated as such novelties. And that review is very good and talks about representation in ways that I don't personally feel comfortable doing myself. I recommend you read it. I will say, though, that this problem goes deeper. I've already discussed that the world of Harry Potter is built to preserve Harry's journey, and that's true. And as Joanne's tried to expand this world out, all it can show is her lack of interest in learning about the world. So her world just copies itself and stretches out all over. Multiple countries and cultures are shoved into the very English construction of the private boarding school, ignoring large swaths of cultural histories and nuances, and it stems from that inertia. It also, in Hogwarts Legacy, showcases that this inertia, this ignorance, stretches not only across space, but time. Can we get the Doctor Who noise? No? An entire century ago, Hogwarts looks almost exactly the same. Diagon Alley looks almost exactly the same. The Hogwarts Express is still here. Joanne's world is one that is an endless, pristine, fixed point. This is the devotion to the status quo we've seen in her narratives, both Harry Potter and the Fantastic Beasts films. The idea that there is an ideal world that we've already achieved, all we need to do now is maintain it. And that is the heart of a lot of these bigotries. It almost feels trite to say that change is scary, but that's kind of what this is. You know the common sentiment you've seen with people who are confronted over their bigotries, where they proclaim that they have a friend of said race, gender, religion, whatever? I believe that in a lot of these cases, it's true that they have these friends. The way homophobes talk about gay people, the way gender-critical people talk about trans and non-binary people, is predominantly abstracted and speculative. Any hairy man can say he feels like a woman and enter the lockers as he pleases, as a sentiment denies trans people a real part of the conversation and appeals to a person's fear and disgust, mostly because more often than not, meeting real people in real situations will end with people not thinking about this high concept argument. I have likely run into people out in the real world who hate trans people and have been perfectly nice to me on the street, because that's bigotry. To imply deliberate malice or even deliberate intent on the part of these people misses how this works and bypasses the real argument. So we're stuck trying to construct pure evil out of a mountain of dog whistles. So, with that said, I'm not saying that we can't call Hogwarts Legacy or Joanne bigoted, but we need a different way of thinking about this. Hogwarts Legacy isn't bigoted in some kind of inherent way, but it supports and enables bigotry. These allusions to the Fetmilch Uprising, the anti-Semitic goblins, the story about an aggrieved minority as uncomplicated evil creatures you can literally torture with no moral weight, these can embolden bigoted ideas. This framework helps make the more useful argument, not about what something is, but what something does. Joanne isn't evil in the depths of her soul, or maybe she is, no one can ever know that except for her, but her actions, her associations, who she supports and props up with her platform, who she attacks and decries, all of this supports and promotes transphobic hatred. She has never claimed to be a transphobe, but her words are quoted on the Senate floor in order to push through legislation that will impose unfair restrictions on trans youth. Her quips against her detractors will result in said detractor getting cyberbullied, wasting time on trying to say that any one of her actions is proof of her fundamental evil is a pointless mire, when we could point to her actions and what they're doing to empower further bigotry. I feel really horrible having to say this all because this idea was put out in Innuendo Studios' documentary on Anita Sarkeesian from 2015. Jesus Christ. Does no one watch Innuendo Studios? He's arguably the best video essayist out there. We're left with a lingering problem. Strindberg's Miss Julie contains within it an explicit message. He wanted to destroy the notion that women should aspire to live in a man's role, to be the head of a household, to hold real power and agency, and many people believe that he failed to write a play that supports this. A lot of women find Julie empathetic and heartbreaking and tragic, a thing that Strindberg predicted that people would do. Death of the author often comes into conversations like these. Often in modern talks about British wizard books and their turfy author, people talk about it as though it's carte blanche to just mindlessly enjoy things that bad people make. And that's not what that means. Bart's essay, well, okay, his essay was actually kind of low-key bitchy about critics, so I feel a little weird talking about him right now, but it also more expressed the idea that you cannot use the author to read the text definitively. A proper application of this theory on Miss Julie wouldn't say that we throw the preface out because Strindberg doesn't matter and enjoy how rad Miss Julie is because she's sad and angry, but that in looking at his intent and setting it aside, we can derive a meaning from the text as given that could construct Miss Julie as a tragic figure instead of a symbol of the futility of the half-woman like he wanted. One reading doesn't strictly invalidate the other, but removing the context in which a text is written is different from finding meaning unintended by its author. Even though in this case the author does, again, explicitly call you a weakling and a coward for thinking of Miss Julie as tragic, and for some reason theater history nerds fall for it anyway, fine. Look, I'll shut up about it. Can we apply this to Hogwarts Legacy? Well, no. Not because I'm forbidding you from doing it, but because it's not very good. It's actually kind of important for the rest of the essay that I spent all that time talking about the game by itself. Good job, past me. You horrible bitch. Hogwarts Legacy tells a tale that fundamentally does not care about the world it's built on. Slavery, inequity, oppression all exist prominently in the wizarding world of Eld, but the story pushes past all of these favor of a story about the main character. A very special 15-year-old, skilled at whatever the player wants to be skilled at. Someone who can solve a mystery that culminates in an ancient, ambiguous power that the player can choose to hold or seal away with no consequence. A player character that enters into the lives of their friends, their teachers, the memories of important people from the distant past, and nothing changes. Hogwarts Legacy ends with one less professor alive, one less leader of an aggrieved people alive, another bad guy still at large who seems to be guilty of being bad for wanting to upset the status quo for his own ends, likely to be taken down in a future property. You can separate this text from Joanne's world, her narratives, her stories, her mind, but it's a separation that ultimately seems to just highlight how much the text wants to hold on to those trappings. Which makes sense, because it is the only thing holding the game together. Underneath its association to the source material is a game constructed entirely out of tropes and conventions that have worn a groove into the very heart of the AAA landscape with no interest in exploring its medium. That horrible Chamber of Secrets game I've been making you watch while I yell at you about Wizards was hastily built on top of popular gaming conventions to cash in on a popular thing. It's cut many corners and doesn't really care about the medium or what it could do with it, and now, 21 years later, we're seeing the same thing. Our technology is better, our convention's more refined, but the game is just gesturing at its audience to reflect on their love of a series they likely read as children for profit. Profit that will make its way inevitably into Joanne's hands. So, if you've gotten this far, thank you, and I am sorry. And I'm not going to tell you not to play it. At the end of the day, nothing matters, and if you want to have fun with the incredibly mid-Wizard game, enjoy the $70 purchase. However, if you're a part of the crowd that wants to play it, or has been playing it, and you've been feeling this powerful guilt over this action, enough that you've been trying to talk to trans friends to get any kind of reassurance that it's okay, that you're a good person still, I would interrogate that. That guilt has come from somewhere. Also, you're not allowed to ask me if it's okay to play this game. I already told you I don't care. Also, please don't ask other trans people this either. Play the game or don't. Care less about the quality of your soul and instead think about your actions and what you're putting into the world, and if it's something you want to be doing. Thank you for watching. Special thanks to Alexi Angelica, Caitlin Fisher, Dector A, the Bluebird Counseling Group, Lewis Wells, Low Res, Maria Aladren, Mozzie VT, Natalie C. Slane, Narai the Redmarked, Pneumatic Raven, Professor Bopper, Rach, St. Rawberry, Thomas Volpez, and Zetetic.